Welcome to today's American Security Project webinar. This conversation is on the record. A recording of this session will be available upon conclusion. All audience members will remain on mute, but please submit your questions through the Q&A box below. And with that, pass it to Patrick.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning from Washington. I'm Patrick Costello, the CEO of the American Security Project. The Biden administration has ambitious climate goals, and the Department of Energy is a critically important player. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provided some new authorities to DOE's Loan Program Office to advance the commercialization of key technologies that are critical to our nation's economic and climate goals, serving as a bridge to bankability for innovative and high-impact energy technologies. I'm delighted to be joined by Jigar Shah, who's the director of the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office. Essentially, he's the clean tech czar at the DOE, and the Washington Post recently said that he might be the most important man in America when it comes to boosting the nation's deployment of clean energy and meeting the president's ambitious goals. Now, the office plays an important role when providing loan guarantees to clean energy. But before entering the administration to run the LPO, Mr. Shah was most recently the co-founder and president of Generate Capital, where he focused on helping entrepreneurs accelerate decarbonization solutions through the use of low-cost infrastructure as service financing. He's also a LinkedIn mega influencer, and he spent the last 2 decades making a compelling case for the climate-fixing, profit-generating potential of clean energy. And now he has been granted more capital and a bigger platform. Mr. Shah, thank you so much for joining us. To our guests on the line, I'm going to engage Mr. Shah in conversation, but please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function in the chat, and I'll weave them into our discussion. So let's get started. If we're going to radically change and reshape the US and the global economy to achieve net zero emissions profile by mid-century for the whole economy, by 2035 for electricity, we have to accelerate how we develop, scale, and deploy technology. So based on the current trajectory, is that achievable or not? And if not, what is the delta between where we are and where we need to be?
Yeah, no, well, thanks for that warm introduction. And looking at myself on the screen, I think I probably didn't get any fashion awards, but appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you. Look, I think that there's a couple of challenges that we have in front of us, right? One is that we started in the 2010s around whether we actually had the technology to be able to tackle this problem, right? And I think the government redoubled its efforts. And we continue to spend more money every year on R&D and making sure that we have the technologies to be able to make this transition cost effectively and in a way that's actually better for consumers, right? I mean, that we want human progress to continue to get better over time and not some sort of shared sacrifice moment. I think at this point, there's a huge amount of confidence that we have the technologies to meet all of our 2030 goals. Right? I mean, can we get to zero carbon by 2030? No, but not with the technologies we have today. But we can meet all the president's 2030 goals at COP and all the goals that were made at promises that were made at COP through technology that exists today. Right? And the IEA and others have said that would get us to 1.8 degrees, which is not terrible. I mean, that's a lot better than I think people felt like we were aiming at before. And I think that when you think about the challenges in front of us, there's a couple, right? The biggest challenge that we have is really an inertia and an implementation challenge, right? We have things that are already ridiculously cost effective. Like everyone knows that streetlights should all be powered by LED. We already know how to do that. Technology's been around for a long time, yet only 50% of our streetlights in this country are LED. Why? Well, because there's ingrained inertia, right? The person who sells, metal halide bulbs, wants to continue to sell more metal halide bulbs. And that person needs to add LEDs to their catalog, right? And so that has to happen. Same thing's true with police cars, right? Every police car you ever see is idling at, all day. And they've got a kilowatt worth of electronics running in the car all the time. And they should all be electric. And every police force that has gone electric has found that they basically get less than a 3-year payback to do that, right? And so these kinds of things require a level of local engagement that heretofore has not been seen, right? So the vast majority of people lobby, Congress and say, you have to pass this piece of legislation. And I'm not suggesting they shouldn't, but I am saying that there's a lot of additional efforts that need to be made at the city council, the mayor level. I mean, the other thing is, out of the 19,500 towns we have in this country, 2,000 of them control their own electric utility. 2,000 of them. And so if you wanted ubiquitous solar panels on roofs, or you wanted ubiquitous electric vehicles in garages or whatever, there are electric utilities who, could be told by the city council that this is something that we want you to do, right? And so I feel like there's a lot of wait and see effort occurring right now, but we have the technologies and we just need to figure out a way to scale it up by 2030.
Great. Now, let's continue to pull this thread on the state and local engagement. I think that cities in particular are going to be critically important to help us meet our emissions goals. And they're also fantastic laboratories.
Yeah.
So can you just talk a bit about your office specifically, but also broader DOE, the nature of your engagement with state and locals?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would not call them laboratories, although I understand why you're saying that. That certainly is what we think about them from a policy perspective. But I think from an emissions reduction perspective, they are ground zero, right? I mean, when you think about colleges and universities, there are thousands of colleges and universities that have signed pledges to reduce their carbon emissions, right? And many colleges and universities operate like a small city. Remember, 14,500 of the 19,500 towns we have in this country have a population less than 5,000, right? And there are many universities who have a population of 50,000, right? And so those are small towns. They've got buses, they've got waste disposal, they have central plant heating and cooling. They have all sorts of things, and they have the expertise at their university to be able to implement this stuff. Oh, and by the way, if you implemented this at scale, the life skills that the students would learn through that process of how hard it is to do it would serve them well in their careers going forward, right? And so there are many reasons that people should do this, but the main reason they should do it is it's the largest wealth creation opportunity in front of us in this entire century, right? I mean, when you think about the market correction that's recently occurred in, high growth stocks, right? The Apples and the Googles and whatever, I think there's a realization by Wall Street investors that physical infrastructure matters, that we can't just live in, like little packets of data that move around the internet. There actually has to be a data center built that controls it. There needs to be a power plant built that powers that data center, right? There needs to be water supplies to cool that data center, right? All of these things are old in this country, and we have got to upgrade all of it. And we have a choice in front of us. Do you want to upgrade it the wrong way, which then costs you more money for the next 40 years? Or do you want to upgrade it the right way? We have a bipartisan infrastructure bill that gives everyone the money necessary to upgrade their infrastructure. But now we need state and local decision makers to decide to do things in a way that's wealth creating instead of wealth destroying.
You sit in a unique place in the policy ecosystem. You and many of your colleagues come out of the finance sector, out of capital sector. So can you talk a bit about how you engage with capital markets there? I mean, I'm a policy guy, so you just come at things from a very different angle than many in the policy ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't say that the distance between the policy folks and the finance folks are much different. I think the difference is that there are many policy folks who really think about things in 2-year election cycles, right? And the finance folks, are accused often of not thinking long-term, right? Because we have quarterly earnings and all sorts of things. But when it comes to the infrastructure side of the ledger, which is where I've really cut my teeth, we only think in 20 to 40-year increments, right? Like if I finance, for instance, a set of a wastewater treatment plant upgrade, let's say, right? And that wastewater treatment plant upgrade is relying on technology that doesn't have a supply chain that can provide it with operations and maintenance or, consumables, right? New chemicals, whatever it is, right? Well, then I'm going to have a huge problem in 7 years, but my bonds are getting paid back in 20 to 40 years. And so, that's not a great investment for me unless it's able to be future-proofed, right? And so there's two ways of solving that. One way is to say, well, I don't care. I'm just going to get a guarantee from the city. And if the city loses money on that infrastructure in the future, well, they still have to pay back my bonds, right? And that's what a lot of folks have done. But increasingly, what you're finding is there's a lot of investors saying, hey, wait a second, we don't want you to build that wastewater treatment plant that way. This wastewater treatment plant has to have anaerobic digesters built into it because that's the future. And there are a lot of people who don't like PFAS right now, right? Which is coming from, all these like chemicals and things that we have in our wastewater. And there are technologies that can destroy PFAS and return them back into their elemental nitrogen, phosphorus, forms. And then we can put that back into agriculture. And so that's going to be a requirement for your new facility, right? And so there's a lot of investors who are saying, we use these words like ESG or whatever. I don't know that anyone really knows exactly what that means. But what it should mean on the infrastructure side is let's build things that will last the test of time. Why wouldn't you do that? But it's amazing how many people don't. It's amazing how many people basically say, well, but I kind of know how to build this thing because my father taught me how to build this thing. And therefore, I took over the business from my father. And so we should build it the exact same way. And I was like, well, okay, but that is a wealth destroying action, right? We should instead position this asset in this community in a way that creates wealth, right? And so I think that there is a fundamental tension between what the investors are pushing for, right, which is future-proof infrastructure, and policymakers and politicians who are saying, well, but we don't want to piss off this particular contractor or this vendor or this group that's used to doing things an old way. And my point is, you can bridge that, right? I mean, we have a shortage of engineering, procurement, construction contractors in this country. We have a shortage of tradespeople. So it is worth investing in those people to make sure that they can make this transition. And so we're not leaving anybody behind. We're actually bringing them with us on this journey. But I do think investors have been sounding the alarm around all of the infrastructure they see that is likely going to become stranded assets. And I think it's been misinterpreted by policymakers to think that this is actually them being green or them being, climate forward, when in fact they just want a better chance of making their money back over the life of the investment.
Right. Now, the LPO was created in the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and it works with entrepreneurs. And the office has helped some really important companies at critical stages of their development. The Obama administration invested in Tesla, for example. But during the last administration, it largely was unused to its full potential. But since you've come in, if you could just share your vision and how the office has grown a bit under your leadership.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that, look, we are in a very unique moment in time. The amount of equity available to clean energy and climate reduction technologies is at an all-time high, right? So people are going public. I mean, without a product that they're selling, they're going public 2 years before their product's coming out. Frothy might be a good word, right? But you still have the same, valley of death issues, right? So basically, when you think about what a valley of death really is, for these types of companies, whether it's Tesla, right, and making the Model S, which this office really helped them to do, or whether it is Monolith Materials, which we gave a conditional commitment to in December, which is using a 25-year-old technology, which is methane pyrolysis. It's never been brought to commercial scale, but if successful, they are going to make carbon black for tires, which electric vehicles still use, and they're going to make very low-cost hydrogen, which they're converting into fertilizer, which is critically important given that so much fertilizer comes from Ukrainian plants using Russian gas. exported to us to the, port in Tampa, and then shipped by pipeline to Louisiana, and then shipped by pipeline to Nebraska, right? And so when you think about all of those linkages, they really are quite strong, right? But Monolith Materials building one facility doesn't solve any problems in the world, right? And just because they build one facility with a demonstration grant, let's say, that we provide from the government, doesn't mean that you've actually achieved liftoff. And this is a big challenge with the government, is that for a long time, we really thought that if you bring technologies and get them to lab scale demonstration, pilot scale demonstration, and then you provided maybe a few demonstration grants to put the first few out in the market, that at that point, we've done our job, and that the markets, can handle it from here and take off. But what you find is that what the market really wants to see is commercial debt going into projects, right? And so for these companies to be able to raise billions and billions of dollars of equity and proving that their stuff works isn't enough. They actually want to see someone like us who's debt, because what we bring to the table is a real skepticism. Like when you're an equity investor, like you're always talking about what the future might bring, right? You're saying this company is going to be big one day. It's going to be huge. And I want to be in on the ground floor, right? When you're a debt provider, you're saying, how many customers did you serve last week? What was the operating parameters of your project last week? Like, we want to look under the hood and see whether there's actually vaporware there or there's something real there, right? And subjecting yourself to that process can be scary. If you are an entrepreneur who your whole life have been told you're the best and we're so happy to invest in you, right? Having someone like us come and say, here are all the things that we found wrong with your processes is not a great feeling for them, right? But it's necessary for them to gain full acceptance in the capital markets. So if you're going to build 50 monolith material facilities, you need the Loan Programs Office to come in on the first one. And then on the second one, they're going to say, oh, you didn't just have equity investors who thought they were going to make a 10x return on your stock. You actually subjected yourself to the Loan Programs Office and all of the scrutiny that comes with it. Okay, then you have the right mental frame and humility to be considered for our fund as well. And so we are a ticket for those companies to really bridge and, to create this bridge to bankability so that on the other side, they're fully accepted by, capital markets.
Right. So the scrutiny that you apply, it also serves as a credentialing function, essentially.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the areas where you're seeing applications come in, where you're seeing too many applications on similar technologies come in, where there are gaps, where you'd like to see some more come in. So what does that distribution kind of look like?
Yeah, so we want to see, I think the very first thing is we want to see applications from everybody who qualifies for the Loan Programs Office. So I don't care what you're doing. If you're innovative and you save greenhouse gas emissions, I want to hear from you. I don't care whether it's like a focus of the administration or a focus of Wall Street or a focus of whatever. If you've got an incredible idea that can be innovative and save greenhouse gas emissions, we want to hear from you. There's about 20 or so sectors that the administration has identified as critical to the success of meeting our decarbonization goals by 2030, 2035 for electricity grid, and 2050 for the whole economy. And those are areas where we're very proactive, right? Things like sustainable aviation fuels, transmission lines, hydrogen, direct air capture, carbon sequestration and storage, electric vehicle charging, and the list goes on, right? Battery materials, critical minerals, et cetera. And so in those places, there are trade associations that are available. We call them and say, hey, can we introduce you to the Loan Programs Office and what we offer? And when there are companies who receive a $100 million C or D round, we're like their first call. It says, congratulations on raising this much money. Have you heard of the Loan Programs Office? We would love to explain to you what we do. And so I think that is, I think, in our opinion, our mandate. We need to make sure that people know that we exist and that we're here to serve them. I think the other thing is that you do have some people who are more interested than others, right? Some people are more prepared than others. So we've got a concentration of applications in the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, which we run, which is mostly EV manufacturing, supply chain for those EVs, including carbon fiber or wire harnesses or things like that. And then battery manufacturing, then critical minerals. So we have concentrated positions in all those areas. I think on the Title 17 side, we have renewable energy and efficient energy. So we've got a lot of applications in for transmission, sustainable aviation fuel. And so those things are great, as well as non-EV battery chemistries, right? So there's a lot of battery chemistries that are not perfect for cars, but they're great for the grid, right? For 6 hours of storage instead of a half an hour storage. And then we've got our nuclear title, right? We've got over $10 billion of resources available there. And there we're focused on nuclear fuel, right? I mean, with the Ukraine and Russia conflict, 25% of our nuclear fuel in this country comes from Russia. And so figuring out how to replace that with American technology, American manufacturing here is something that we're in the middle of, as well as standing up, small modular reactors and micro reactors, which are ready to go. And we believe actually can, achieve a very low cost per kilowatt hour. And also I think will be exported around the world to help other countries decarbonize their grids. And so we're leading the way there, and the Department of Defense is leading the way in terms of deploying some of the first units, as well as a partnership that we have with the Canadian government, with Ontario Power Group, that's building, several reactors. And so we're doing a lot of work there. And the last one would be the fossil title, where we're seeing a lot of interest in, methane monitoring and methane reduction in methane emissions. We're seeing a lot of interest in carbon sequestration and storage. And then we're seeing a lot of interest in novel ways of using natural gas as a feedstock, as opposed to using it as a way to burn things. And that's what monolith materials, would be.
Great. If you could just give us a bit of a deeper dive on the nuclear investments that you're seeing. I'm just by way of background, when I started in Washington on Capitol Hill, I worked in the Nevada delegation and spent a lot of time thinking about waste because of the Yucca Mountain issue. So I'm just wondering what you're seeing in terms of investments and innovations when dealing with waste.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I get a lot. You can imagine. I used to be on the board of Greenpeace, and so so I get a lot of questions from people I knew from that era. Look, in general, nuclear waste is something that there are many tried and tested ways of handling nuclear waste, right? I mean, what we do today, right, is we take nuclear waste. We get rid of the most radioactive parts of it, because by definition, when something's radioactive, it's shooting out alpha and beta particles, right? And so by definition, its half-life is very short. And so by putting it into a controlled area for 2 years, most of that material evaporates. Like its half-life is so short, it goes away. So you're left with the medium range waste, right? The stuff that's 100 years, right? And the stuff that's 1,000 years is not really worrisome, because it's not actually emitting anything, right? And there's like casks, right, that Holtec and others make, and then they store those waste on site. And remember, the amount of waste that a nuclear power plant generates in an entire year is less than a coal plant generates in an hour and a half, right? And so in terms of the amount of waste we're talking about, it's tiny, right? Like it's a tiny amount of waste, right? The amount of waste that you could store in the swimming pool that you swim in, over the summer, that size swimming pool can handle the waste for years, right? And so I think it's important for us to just get the scale of this correct before we start answering your question. On ARPA-E did an RFP recently around next generation waste disposal, and we got a huge number of applications, which was great. And then you also have a recognition by some nuclear reactors that the waste actually has real nuclear value as fuel. And so there are some designs that we're working on that are in the advanced reactor demonstration program, where they're using nuclear waste as part of their fuel source. So we're actually, putting it into a reactor to be able to do that. So I would say that managing nuclear waste is something that's top of mind for us, and storing it and paying to store it forever and ever and ever is not our preferred route. I mean, there's real value in that waste, and unlocking that value is what we're doing a lot of work on for research and development.
Great, thanks. The other side of the nuclear coin, so to speak, is fusion. ASP has done work in fusion in the past. If you could just share how your individual thoughts on fusion, but also how the Loan Program Office is maybe investing in some fusion companies, and just your thoughts on the potentially transformational potential of fusion.
Yeah, well, so first, let me just say that, I mean, we're really excited about where fusion is heading. And, and largely I would say, talking to my friends in the fusion space, they're saying many of these ideas actually were thought of in the 80s. So a lot of the ideas are not new. I mean, they're certainly updated. But what's different is we now have the computing power to evaluate all these designs in real time with these, quantum computers, right? And so that's what's changed. And as a result, you've had 10 years of solid work in the fusion space with these really fast computers. And now you have investors recognizing that the work that they've done over the last 10 years is actually likely to lead to a real breakthrough where we'll get the first commercial intention, sort of reactor to generate a single kilowatt hour more than it took to start the reaction, right? We still haven't achieved that point, but we're expecting to achieve that point over the next 5 to 8 years, which is a big deal, right? And once you've made one extra kilowatt hour over what it cost to, start the reaction, well, now you actually can figure out how to keep optimizing that until it becomes a commercial product. And so we're super excited about where fusion is going, but it's not yet something that would constitute a project that would come to the Loan Programs Office for a loan, right? I mean, no one is suggesting that fusion is going to generate electricity for a utility by 2030, or even, I would say even by 2035. No one's even suggesting that. Maybe by 2040 or 2045. And I mean, and the world doesn't stop in 2050, right? We need all this innovation through 2100, et cetera. So I'm glad we're making as much progress as we are on fusion, but it's not something that we think is going to decarbonize the electricity grid by 2035.
Great, thanks for that. And there's been a lot of work at DOE that shows that battery storage will be critical to the president's goal around decarbonizing the grid by 2035. But it seems like the auto sector is getting the most attention. It's where there's the most investment. It's probably because EVs are a hot topic of conversation right now. So I'm just wondering where you're seeing, what other sectors you're seeing attention being paid for in the battery space, and also, are you seeing investments in alternatives to lithium-ion batteries?
Yeah,
it seems like there's a scarcity of resources issue there.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions embedded there, so let me take them maybe step by step. The first thing I would say is that by definition, your cell phone and your laptop battery is willing to pay whatever it takes to give you the service that you want, right? And so the amount of critical minerals in your cell phone that's related to batteries is maybe $1 a phone. And so they're willing to pay $3 a phone if that's what they need to give you triple the amount of battery time, right? And so a lot of the cutting edge stuff is happening in your phone and laptop.
Interesting.
Right? And then the next layer down from that is your car. There are many people who have shown that they're willing to pay a premium for the 300-mile range car instead of the 230-mile range car, right? The 230-mile range car is the LFP battery, right, which we invented here at UT Austin with DOE funding, which is now being, scaled up in China. And then you've got the NMC batteries, right, which are lithium-ion batteries that are the 300-mile range batteries, right? And so these are consumer-facing goods, and so it's by definition something that people are willing to pay a premium for more range or more talk time or more airplane working, right, with your laptop. So that's going to continue afoot, and lithium has no equal, right? Lithium is the best metal in the periodic table. It's a universal giver of electrons. And so you are never going to do better than lithium on that spectrum, right? But those batteries have a linear cost structure. So for every hour of storage you want, you pay another, incremental spot. It doesn't get cheaper with the more hours that you add. It gets more expensive on a linear basis, right? There are lots of other approaches like vanadium redox batteries or nickel hydrogen batteries or zinc batteries or others where there's like a fuel cell, right, that actually does a lot of the work that's expensive. And for every hour of electrolyte that you add to the battery, it costs almost nothing. So the cost of a 2-hour battery versus the cost of a 10-hour battery is almost the same. And so in those cases, today, a 6-hour battery is cheaper to do it with those chemistries than it is to do with lithium-ion battery. And as those technologies get scaled up, that crossover point will come down. So it'll be like at 4 hours, it'll be better to use this other chemistry instead of lithium-ion batteries. Then it'll be 3 hours, then 2 hours, right? And lithium-ion will continue to serve the auto industry because people are willing to pay a premium for it in the auto industry, right? For the more range. The other thing I would say to you is that the scale is not something that people have wrapped their brain around. If you look at the amount of gigawatt hours of battery storage that we need to meet the president's goals, right? He's talking about 50% of all new cars in this country being sold being electric by 2030. And we're already seeing unprecedented amount of demand for electric cars today. 8 million vehicles will take something on the order of 800 gigawatt hours of battery capacity per year, right? And so it depends, obviously, if you're doing 125 kilowatt hour battery in a lithium in a Ford F-150 Lightning, or only a 60 kilowatt hour battery in like a Chevy Bolt, right? But it's roughly 800 gigawatt hours, right? Separately, we're all projecting that by 2030, you'll only have 150 gigawatt hours total of battery capacity on the US grid, right? And so in 1 year, we're planning on shipping 800 gigawatt hours worth of batteries in cars in 2030. The cumulative amount of battery storage we need for the grid by 2030 is 150 gigawatt hours, right? And so it is more likely that your car in your garage is going to be integrated into the grid, and the grid will pay you handsomely for the use of that battery in emergency situations 4 times a year. Then we're just going to willy-nilly just build grid batteries everywhere.
So, can you unpack this kind of, what you're talking about is the bidirectional potential for some of this stuff?
Yeah.
So can you just unpack that a bit for our guests on the line who might not be as familiar with the immense potential of increasing our energy security from bidirectional plug-in EVs?
Yeah, so I think people get a little bit confused about the details of this, but I just think it's important. So when you think about batteries, the way that batteries are defined is through cycle life, right? And then there's charge rates, of course, but like cycle life is what people care about, right? So you're talking about between 3,000 cycles and 10,000 cycles, right? That's the argument. Some pretty much all batteries that are being used for cars or anything else is 3,000 cycles. And some battery chemistries are claiming 10,000 cycles. And there's a lot of R&D coming in from the Department of Energy and others to increase that cycle life, right? So when you talk about using your car to back up your house, right, vehicle to home, right, then you're talking about adding cycles to your battery, right? So if your power goes out and then you use a bidirectional charger to take power out of your car and back up your house, you're talking about adding a cycle to your battery, right? And so people are saying, well, we don't want to add cycles to our battery because then our battery will not last as long. And the auto companies might say, well, then that's going to void the warranty or whatnot, right? But when you think about what this looks like, Sunrun announced a deal with Ford where for $3,800, they will add this, Ford F-150 Lightning goes in your garage, you add this, and now you have the ability to back up your house. Remember, the Ford F-150 Lightning has a 125 kilowatt hour battery. So an average house uses only a couple of kilowatt hours a day, right? So you're now talking about something on the order of at least a week worth of backup from your Ford F-150 Lightning. And depending on the size of your house, it could be 3 weeks of backup power from your Ford F-150 Lightning, right? And if you further restrict it and say, well, we're only going to do emergency loads and not the entire house, right? Well, then now it could be longer, right? And then if you have solar panels on your roof, you're actually recharging at the same time, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of people looking at this, right? And so the number of times that you need to back up your home is, I don't know, 5 times a year, right? It's not a lot, right? And so if you're planning on holding your car for 10 years, you're talking about an extra 50 cycles when the cycle life is 3,000 to 10,000 cycles, right? Literally doesn't matter, right? And then if you're talking about backing up the entire grid with bidirectional charging, the vast majority of grid management can just be done by turning on and off your charger, right? So you program your app to say, stop charging at 70% state of charge, right? Because that 80% basically maximizes your battery life. So stop charging at 70. And then you, grid operator, should pay me to turn on my charger or turn off my charger, right? So if you're producing tons of extra solar and wind that day, then please turn on my charger and charge it all the way up to 80%, right? That does not add any cycles to your battery, right? So the only time that you need to draw power out of your battery for grid purposes is when you have the polar vortex in Texas, or you have, some emergency situations. And the emergency situations in California that everyone keeps talking about were like 120 minutes last year, right? So it wasn't like a multi-day power outage or whatever it is, right? And so again, 50 extra cycles to your battery to do that. So now there's 100 extra cycles, 50 for vehicle to home, 50 for the grid, right? And so the rest of the time, you're really managing the grid just by turning on and off the charger. So it's an entirely new paradigm change, and it scares everybody, but it really shouldn't. And it's going to make our grid stability the best in the world.
And that's fantastic. And thank you for unpacking that. There is a tremendous amount of potential here for our country's energy security, for resilience. And I just appreciate you really shining a light on that and explaining it so thoroughly. We don't have too much time left. So with our remaining time, you have so much exposure to such a wide array of innovations and companies and individuals doing really exciting things in the laboratory. What 2 or 3 things really excites you the most in this space, given your seat and your exposure, and how you can deploy a wide array of resources to help companies scale?
Well, there's a few things that we've talked about today, right? I mean, I think that in general, I think what Fast Company or Wired Magazine or other people care about is just the wow factor, right? When I was a kid, you had Popular Science, and you had this what's new section in the beginning of the magazine, right? And you just wanted to be wowed. You're like, whoa, we can do that. It's sort of like the Segway. Remember when they showed that you could stand up a wheelchair on 2 wheels, and you're like, they can reach the top shelf in a grocery store. This is amazing, right? That's not a lot of what I focus on, right? What I focus on is what we talked about earlier in the conversation, which is how do we decarbonize as fast as we can by 2030, 2035, right? The grid by 2035, right? And then the rest of the economy by 2050. And what I care about is the national security implications around how do we make sure that the United States continues to take this enormous investment that they've made into the Department of Energy and use it to the good of creating jobs in this country, exporting technology around the world to help countries, and in general reduce war and maintain prosperity globally, right? Through all of these technologies, right? Because access to energy is one of the main reasons why people are having increased conflict around the world, right? And so when you think about that equation, I'd say the 3 deals that we have already approved for a conditional commitment are pretty telling, right? Monolith Materials, the largest exporter of carbon black in the world is Russia, right? We are now going to be the largest producer of carbon black in the world if this technology works as we think it will, right? That's a big deal. And the byproduct of it is cheap hydrogen, which then we can make into fertilizer, which, our farmers are absolutely demanding today, right? With fertilizer prices that have gone up. When you look at the Vidalia, Louisiana deal that we just did, we are talking about taking ore from Mozambique for graphite, right, which is naturally occurring there, and it doesn't naturally occur here in the United States, and processing it in Vidalia. We are making sure that the ESG practices of that mine are the highest possible quality. So we are making sure that American values are being used to make sure that the mining industry improves and achieves best practices in Mozambique, which is a country that absolutely is one of the poorest countries in Africa. And, you know, one of the places where these kinds of mines do lead to conflicts in the future. And so we are working hard to make sure that they are, you know, working well within their community, and that there's a sharing of the prosperity and all the things that you do to try to achieve best practices and avoid some of the pitfalls of the past. When you look at the ACES project that we just provided conditional commitment to, we have known for years that electrolyzers can work and produce hydrogen from electricity, right? We used it in World War II to win the war, right? And we've known for years that salt domes can be used to store hydrogen, but we've never actually done it commercially. And so we've now done it commercially. We have a 220 megawatt electrolyzer, and it'll save 150 gigawatt hours worth of hydrogen. Remember what I said before, the entire amount of battery storage capacity that we expect to be on the grid by 2030 will be 150 gigawatt hours. This one facility alone can store 150 gigawatt hours of hydrogen, right? And so when you think about what that means for hydrogen hubs and the decarbonization of industrial processes like cement and steel and chemicals and plastics, right? This is like a huge game changer on this, right? And I can go on the nuclear side as well, where we're having a huge impact on getting our technology, which is the best in the world, fully commercialized by 2030. And I'm really proud of what we're doing there in our office. And so, but we're doing that for HVDC lines. We're doing that for sustainable aviation fuels. So I'm excited about all of these areas. And I believe very strongly that this really will unlock the largest wealth creation opportunity of our lifetimes.
That's fantastic. It really is an exciting time. And Mr. Shah, I really appreciate you joining us this morning for a wide-ranging discussion. Keep up the great work and the energy that you bring to this enterprise. It's fantastic. So thank you for sharing your vision and your expertise and your energy with our guests on the line. And please don't hesitate to contact us if the American Security Project can ever be of any assistance.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having this forum for our office, but also I hope that everyone recognizes that we only do good things because you tell us your best ideas. And so I very much appreciate you continue to engage with us and letting us in on the secrets that you know.
And I guess in final comment is don't hesitate to reach out to the Loan Program Office. Mr. Shah and his team want to hear from you if you're doing interesting and innovative things. So with that, thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it.